and welcome to another edition of the MediaTwits. I'm Mark Glaser, Executive Editor of PBS MediaShift. Today we'll be talking about changes at NPR Public Radio's flagship and what it's doing to compete in the digital age with a new CEO and new reorganization, and also the new types of apps from Stitcher, other streaming radio and streaming podcasts. What challenge do they give for terrestrial radio, and how will radio and audio be consumed in the future? And before we get into the discussion, I want to introduce our panel. We have Andrew Lee from American University joining us, Fannie Cohen, our producer in New York, Joseph Lichterman from Neiman Journalism Lab, Stan Alcorn, freelance journalist who contributes to Marketplace, NPR and Fast Company, Suzanne Perry from Chronicle of Philanthropy. So first, let's talk a little bit about what's going on at NPR. They named a new CEO, I guess the fifth CEO in the last 8 years, Jarl Mohn, who has a history as a DJ. I guess his name was Lee Masters for a long time. And he worked at MTV for a while. He launched the E! Entertainment Network. And he's also been a big donor to KPCC and chairman, I think, of that station as well. So he has some experience as a philanthropist, and is coming into a situation where NPR has had a deficit the last few years despite very large fundraising gifts, including one from the Kroc family from years back, and pretty high popularity as far as listenership. NPR seems like it couldn't have been in a stronger position, yet it's losing money. Suzanne, you had a really good story in the Chronicle of Philanthropy about NPR and its new CEO. What do you think about Jarl and kind of his chances there and kind of getting it back into shape?
Well, as you said, they've gone through 5 CEOs in about 8 years. He did promise to the board that he would stay at least 5 years, so that's a step in the right direction. I think he brings some assets. For one, he has actually worked with a local station, Southern California Public Radio, and one of the big problems that NPR has had, and it's been aggravated by the whole move to digital radio, is relations with its stations. And I think he can come and say, well, I've worked with a station, I raised money for that station, I feel your pain, because as you may know, stations, the 200 plus members of NPR control the board. They also provide more than a third of its revenue. So keeping those relations together is really critical. And how that's been aggravated by the whole move to digital is that a lot of those relations traditionally were based on terrestrial radio. In other words, we will pay you, NPR, for your programs, and the fees are based on the number of listeners. So the idea is we will pay for the programs and we will raise money locally to support our station. Now with people turning to podcasts and online streaming, there's that relationship is being frayed, and the stations are saying, look, we're not getting the listeners that we used to because you're putting your programs on iTunes. So what are we going to do about this? And that's the kind of tension that I think he's going to have to deal with.
Yeah, Joseph, what do you see as some of the challenges at NPR when it comes to digital? I mean, they've had very popular podcasts. Now they've just announced that they're killing one of their shows, Tell Me More, to try to cut back on people. This is, I think, the third show targeted to African Americans that was cut. But they're also trying to reach more diverse audiences, I guess, ironically. What do you see as some of the big challenges for the CEO when it comes to digital?
Yeah, I think it's just a crowded marketplace, and figuring out how to make NPR content stick out and really get people to listen to it is definitely a challenge. I think they have some nice apps and have some nice programs that are really reaching out to younger people, more diverse audiences, even with the news this week that they're cutting back. But I think they're just going to need to continue along that road and really make that a priority.
Yeah, and I mean, even though there was a study, I think, done in the UK, and they found that people were still listening to radio, but less hours were being, like, just as many people were listening to terrestrial radio, but I think spending less hours on terrestrial radio and more in other forms of audio, whether it's, streaming or podcasts or other things. So there's this problem, I think, that younger people are not necessarily tuning into radio as much, and cars aren't even coming, with just terrestrial. There's so many other features on a car now that you can listen to other things now.
Exactly, but I think they're trying to take advantage of things like social media and really use Facebook, use Twitter, Pinterest, Tumblr, really to reach out to a younger audience and go where they are, find them on these networks they're already on, and break up the content really in ways that are more digestible and really easier and more shareable, that people want to share and do things like that.
And Stan, you're a contributor to Marketplace and NPR as well. You also do kind of some writing for Fast Company as a print journalist. I mean, how can you tell about people, how do people consume your stories a lot? I mean, are you constantly seeing people going online to listen to them? Are they listening through podcasts? Are they listening more just to the radio? I mean, do you have any sense of how people are even listening to you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because there's definitely a real division of where the digital labor has been coming out of NPR and public radio and the radio stories themselves, I would say. A segment I do for Marketplace might have millions of listeners on the radio, but it's going to get a tiny number of clicks on the web. NPR has done really well digitally, in large part by not emphasizing audio, I would say. If most of their most trafficked posts are not audio segments on the web, and most of their social media efforts are not necessarily geared around audio. So I think just that the format makes it difficult. The stories that tend to get a lot of pickup and get seen a lot on the web, it's because they're not audio. Of course, NPR does have some very popular podcasts, so there's digital listenership there, but it is not growing as rapidly as one might like, and it also is a little bit outside of the social media world that's driving so much of media traffic for other media.
And why is it that it seems like audio doesn't really go viral the same way that video does or photos do? I mean, have you noticed that too, Stan?
Yeah. I mean, I wrote this long article for Dig earlier this year where that was one of the kind of subheads. It's like, why does audio not go viral, and why doesn't it get shared socially? And I mean, I think there's a lot of different reasons, but the most obvious ones have to do with the fact that the way that most people listen to audio is at a time when they're not confronted with a screen. It's when you're driving a car, it's when you're walking around and listening to something on your device. And those aren't great times for using Facebook, for using Twitter, and there's not a social experience that's been really effectively built into the modes in which we're usually in when we're listening. So there's a real division, I think, between the kind of browse mode and share mode and the way that people actually listen. And there are attempts to change that. Just yesterday, actually, BuzzFeed, they've hired someone to do audio for them, and they put out their first audio listicle, which, it's still pretty limited. I think it's 10 different little audio clips of people with different sounds where, like, they've been slowed down, trying to find the things that might be shareable. But you can see that there's always going to be a difference between that kind of short-form shareable content, even if it's audio, and some of the longer form storytelling that is where a lot of public radio, probably the public radio that you or I probably listen to, the way where those two stories tend to be. And since you can't really skim a 5-minute radio story or a 10-minute radio story and pass it on, I think to make that a more shareable experience is going to continue to be a challenge unless there's some kind of big leaps forward, I think, in terms of the platforms that exist.
And Andrew, what's your take on what NPR has done so far in the digital world and what its challenges are in social too?
Yeah, I think NPR is facing the same type of thing that the broadcast TV networks are seeing in the face of Netflix and on-demand and YouTube and things that where the consumers are demanding to consume when they want, where they want it, and what format they want. So, I'm still a big listener of NPR in the morning. As I'm getting ready, as I'm moving around, I like to make sure it kind of seeps into my brain. But even most of the time, I go to their iPad app or their iPhone app, but it kind of shows you how they really still need some work in that area. So, for example, the iPad screen is huge, and if you go to a program to try to build your playlist, saying, okay, I want this story, but not this one, not this one, more than half the time, you can't see the whole headline of the story. On a 9-inch screen, there's the headline is cut off, and it just frustrates me to no end. I have to click on an extra little button to see the capsule and then close it back up and go to the next story. And that's just inexcusable on a 9-inch screen to not be able to read the full headline of stories. So it shows how it was a decent first move into creating a interactive app on the iPad, but it needs a long way to go. It's a generation behind in that area. And I think if you just look at what happened in February when one of their more notable contributors, Mike Pesca of NPR, he used to do the best sports segment for NPR several times a week. He just left NPR to go to Slate full time, and now he has a daily show called The Gist, which a lot of people were looking forward to, but people were wondering, can this guy do it? He had a great, witty, weekly show that he did as a guest with Slate, and I think he's hit it out of the park. The Gist has a fraction of the staff of a typical NPR show, and he does, I think Stan knows better than I do, like 2 or 3 stories every day, and does it really sharp and witty. So that's what NPR is up against. And if you look at what Slate does, which I think is like the cream of the crop, they interact with their audience in ways that are fun, are relevant. They do live shows all the time. They get cheering crowds in college campuses, in community centers. They interact on their Facebook group. They put out trivia contests and things. So that's something that NPR should look at because Slate is growing. They have a cult following for their podcasts. I listen to 4 of them a week at least. And that's something where I see is the gold standard.
And Fannie, you're at WNYC doing some production work too. Do you think maybe, and there's some really innovative things going on at WNYC at the local level, is it really maybe the local level is the place where there's going to be more innovation as far as digital goes?
Yeah, I mean, we've been working on something called the Sleep Project, where we're having different teams of people tabulate their sleep and keep track of it over a long period of time. And it's been a long project, and it's been very highly engaging. There have been different segments about it where they talk to sleep experts, and it's tied in with this whole real, live, interactive, digital component. And it's been very appealing to people in a personal way. So I think that's a great example of, even though that's not necessarily local, it's something that feels community-oriented and something that people really care about. And they enjoy having the close proximity to the host who is the leader of the team. So people get to be on a team with Brooke Gladstone or John Hockenberry, and that's super cool. And that's people who are fans of, I think, public radio, generally, regardless of their listener or their local station. It's such an intimate medium, and they like having that closeness to the host and to the station. So whether it's through commenting online, through contacting listener services, or through, doing something like this where you feel like you're actually being part of the content that's being created, that speaks so much to people, because the whole public radio model is saying, this is your station. You are the funders of the station, and so you're also now creating the content.
And Joseph, do you think that's possibly one of the things that terrestrial radio has, is this kind of, there are these personalities that are on all the time, and there's kind of a closeness and a way that you can call into some of the shows and talk to people. I mean, it had kind of interactivity going before there was the web.
Right, absolutely. There's definitely an intimateness to the radio. It's you and one person talking to you, and I think it'd be wise to take advantage of that, and really it's like you have a relationship with these personalities, and I think NPR has gotten some viralness out of that in the past. Sort of, there's a Tumblr, Babes of NPR, I think it was called, where sort of it was looking at the different personalities, and actually you can see them and how that's a different relationship. So it's, I think, definitely something that they should and hopefully can take advantage of.
And Suzanne, I want to get back to a little bit about the finances of NPR, bringing, having problems with, fundraising and falling short, and the local stations have done a pretty good job in that area. And the question is, can NPR actually, they don't typically go directly to the consumer for fundraising. Do you think that might change, that there's a lot of people kind of talking about new ways of NPR working with its stations to raise money, or figuring out a way to charge people? I mean, do you think this kind of long-held standard will change as far as fundraising?
Well, I talked to some people who think it definitely will have to change, and they were quite concerned that there's no planning around that. There's been this historical tension, as I mentioned, between NPR and the stations. NPR has a policy that it will not raise money directly from listeners. And of course, when you consider they have 178 million, or sorry, I might have gotten that wrong, but anyway, they've got many, many listeners. There are fundraisers who are like, wow, if I could capture all of that audience, one ex-fundraiser told me they could bring in $10 billion, he thought, just by doing a nationwide campaign. But the local stations, of course, don't want NPR tapping their listeners, so it does create a problem. But if you have people who are only listening to radio online, that's millions of listeners that you're missing out on in terms of getting them to chip in. One thing that a number of people mentioned is that in thinking about digital technology, should also be thinking of how to raise money using digital technology. In other words, wouldn't it be great if you had an app and you're listening to a program and you just tap on it right away and it says contribute to public radio? And again, you'd run into the issue of, well, does that money go to the local station or the and to NPR? So those kinds of things would all have to be worked out. But that's actually something, when I talked to Mr. Mohn, he mentioned that that's something he wants to look at. Like, how can we use digital technology to bring in more revenue? One area where they're also working on, and he's an expert on that, is major gifts. The Croc gift was really extraordinary, more than $230 million. There's been nothing like it since. There was nothing like it before that, and everyone's like, where's our next Croc gift? And so that's something that actually the NPR fundraising department is working on already, something they called collaborative fundraising, where they work with local stations to try and get more major gifts like that.
Well, you got to find your billionaire, like the Washington Post and all these other places. But I mean, most people don't really think about it. The same thing with PBS. There are these local stations, and there's this affiliate thing going on. And most people just, listening to NPR, they just think of it as NPR, even if they're listening to whatever the local station is, KQED, WNYC. I think a lot of times, they just want to give to NPR, and it seems like these kinds of differences should be able to be worked out. I mean, the stations are the ones running NPR. They're all kind of one and the same. So it seems a little bizarre that these kind of differences are still there. Don't you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I think, as we see all these folks who are innovating with other kind of micro donation platforms like Flattr, Flattr, or Patreon, as
But
we
they
see,
just won't do that,
right,
the
as Suzanne
NPR,
said,
PBS.
right, as Suzanne said, you have that long-standing agreement. Now we understand why that is. The same reason why you don't want to decimate local coverage, right? You don't want to have the mothership suck away all the funding and then the folks there. But there's got to be some middle path, right? So if you click on the button that says, let me donate because I heard this piece and it really resonated with me, you could even put in there, like, do you want to take part of that donation and give it to your local station? You specify who that is. Why not have things like that? Because right now, as Suzanne said, they're leaving so much money, off the table that they are not tapping that, and people are willing to give that kind of money with techniques that are easy, that are one click, and there's no possibility of doing that right now.
And Fannie, did you want to talk about? I know KQED and WNYC have had some online campaigns where I think you give money and then you don't have to hear the pledge drive pitch.
Yeah, which I think is so brilliant. It's called the Fundraiser Free Stream, and if you give ahead of time, they give you a special login so you can listen online, no fundraiser. And I think that's something that people will pay for in the moment, because when you are caught off guard and you hear a pledge drive suddenly, it's the most aggravating thing in the world, and you would pay money in that moment to stop hearing it. And I mean, that's what digital technology affords us, is that you can do something like that.
And who knows, if someone comes up with like a pop-up blocker for pledge drives or something, then they'd really be in trouble.
Yeah.
One of the people I talked to said there's no online version of the pledge drive, and of course everyone's trying to think of what that might be. I just wanted to clarify, because I got it wrong before. There's 27 million listeners to NPR programs, and it's a $178 million budget. Sorry about that.
That's okay. And I know, in fundraising, I mean, there's also been these Kickstarter campaigns. Planet Money raised a lot of money with their T-shirt project that I know we've talked about before. Stan, what do you think about kind of the chances for crowdfunding and how that might work for some shows, and just coming straight from the producers and the people who are making the programs?
Yeah, well, and I think the other big success that people like to talk about is 99% Invisible, where Roman Mars has now done 2 different massive campaigns and raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for his show. Public radio people like to say, oh, it's taking, Kickstarter. This is really the public radio model. We pioneered this, asking people to chip in for something they believe in. I mean, I think that those examples do show that it can work when you have a really big audience, which is true for, a large handful of programs. I think for folks who are, not getting hundreds of thousands of downloads from the kind of people who are really into design, who are probably a higher income demographic than some other podcasts, it's a tougher sell. So, I mean, I think it's definitely, it makes sense, especially in the podcast world, where if you're not relying on donations, you're relying on ads with, CPM in like the low double digits. Again, you need a really big audience to make that work. So I think that really that cobbling together a decent living as an independent producer for an audio show, it's only possible at a pretty large scale. But these experiments like the T-shirt project and 99% Invisible show that there's definitely a lot that could be capitalized on by bigger shows. But yeah, they have to both have a big audience and then not be bound by some of the strictures that NPR might be. So there's kind of a push and pull, I guess, in terms of needing to be independent, but needing to be pretty big.
And you did a story recently for Fast Company about Stitcher and their kind of new Listen Later feature, which basically allows you to set up your own playlist of different podcasts that you want to listen to, and you can basically just play them pretty easily and seamlessly later when you want to. What do you think about this idea of Instapaper for audio, where you can grab different pieces of audio. And I know there's some other services that are being developed too, so that you can create kind of an audio feed for yourself when you're offline.
Yeah, I'm very into these features. I mean, I think that it's a niche within a niche, right? Like the people who use Instapaper and Pocket to read long articles later, it's already a small segment of internet users, though it adds up to a whole lot of saved content. I think 1 billion things have been saved now on Pocket, I believe. But the people who are browsing and finding audio online and want to listen to it later, that's already going to be a smaller population, but it's a population that I'm among and for whom there has not been a very good solution. I use Huffduffer, and it's this janky kind of workaround. But the fundamental difficulty is that audio out there on the web, it's gotten easier. More of it is just out there as an MP3 file, but a lot of stuff it's in a flash player, or they don't make it available for download because it uses music, and there are different licensing issues around downloading compared to streaming. And so to just get that audio from your browser to somewhere where you might be able to, where you'd actually want to listen to it, which is probably your smartphone, it's just a tall order, because audio files are big. They're not like text files. It's not as easy to just seamlessly get them from one place to the other. And there's no single standard, single platform like YouTube that makes it really easy. So I think so much of the challenge for audio in a digital age is figuring out how to close this loop and get audio to people's digital devices when your car comes with a radio, your smartphone doesn't. You got to download some app, and if it's a single shows app, it's not going to connect you with all the other shows. So I think that there's a lot of different efforts to kind of close that loop, and what Stitcher's done is interesting. It's kind of add this listen later button to a lot of shows that are partnered with them, so that with one click, if you're a Stitcher user, you'll be able to listen to it from your playlist. But it only works to it's one of these things, there's a big chicken and egg problem, because you probably use Spotify or Pandora, you use a single app for all your music listening. In the same way, I think most people want a single app for all their spoken word listening, whether it's a podcast app or a streaming radio app. And so if you can only listen to some subset, like all the public radio or all the PRI content, it's a tougher sell, I think. So it's cool to see these products, but I think that to do something holistic still seems like it's out there on the far horizon, maybe.
Yeah, and we've had similar discussions about streaming TV and streaming movie content, and how you can't get everything in one place. I mean, YouTube does have a lot of things, not always legally, but you can't see everything on Netflix, everything on Hulu, everything on Amazon. You need to have all of them to see everything, and then there's still other content out there. Andrew, what do you think the chances are of getting some sort of super audio player, both for kind of speech-based content and also music?
No, I think that's definitely something that needs to be done. I mean, one of the funny things is that NPR used to have this saying that they were the place where driveway moments happened, right? You were listening to an NPR show that was so good, you pulled in your driveway and you just sat there and had to finish listening to it. Now, that's kind of a paradigm from yesteryear, and that's not going to cut it anymore. You need to be able to click on a button and say, okay, that show that's airing now, I got to run in and pick up my kid from school, but somehow buffer that somewhere else or record that somewhere else. And if you look at what folks like Vox or LA Times is doing with their online text content, which is kind of cool, where you can, while you're scrolling down an article, you can select some text and boom, it's ready there. It tells you how many characters it is. You can tweet it out. You can do all these other things. You need that same paradigm in audio in some way. So I'm a big fan of innovation in that clipping or audio clipping space, and no one's really done it yet in a sophisticated way, but there needs to be innovation in this space.
And Fannie, you think maybe Apple has a chance to do that? I mean, obviously iTunes is a huge hub already, but it seems like there could be more innovation there.
Yeah, I think that, well, their recent purchase of Beats makes me think that they are getting into the streaming music business even more so than they already have with the iTunes Radio. And over the last few years, they've spent a lot of money developing their podcasting app, which is just for streaming spoken word podcasts through the iTunes store. I don't see any reason why the music app and the spoken word app have to be separate, and it seems to me that Apple is really driving this forward. And I think that from a consumer standpoint, Apple and Beats is still a rumor. Okay, good to know.
Right.
Thanks, Andrew.
We all just assume that it's already happened, but I guess they still have to work out little details or something.
Oh, okay, just a few $1 billion, whatever.
But it sounds like Stan, you don't like the Beats. You think the Beats app is not good.
Oh, I meant the Apple podcasting app. I haven't tried the Beats app. I mean, Apple's podcasting app I think dominates because it's Apple and the smartphone. That's where podcasting happens. It's the easiest thing. But I feel like if you're a real podcast nerd, you probably want all this functionality that it doesn't have. I mean, I remember when I was looking into sharing audio, if you press the share button from the Apple podcast app, it'll post on Facebook a link to the raw RSS feed. It's just there's a lot of aspects to it that I think that they're kind of resting on their market dominance. And I hope that that's not true and that they're going to develop that a lot more, because of course they have a huge platform and they can really guide the whole digital audio world if they choose to do something.
Yeah. Joseph, you wanted to chime in about NPR development there?
Yeah, NPR, I believe, is in the process of testing and developing a new iPhone app, new set of apps currently, so I'm sure this is all stuff they're considering, and really probably, I haven't seen it yet, but going to integrate into the new version of the app when they release it. And I know they've also been thinking a lot about making audio more shareable as well, and earlier this year we published a piece about a study they were doing, a test with a number of local stations as well, and getting shorter clips, a few seconds, a minute at most, and getting them online and seeing how they did on social media. And it wasn't huge numbers, but they did fairly well, and I think people were responsive to sort of these shorter snippets of sound that they could listen to easily.
But Stan, you tried out the NPR app a little bit?
They have. I mean, there may be other apps I'm not aware of, but there is. I've been a beta testing, I guess, this Infinite Player app. I'm not sure when it's going to be no longer in beta, but it's really going in the audio lean back streaming mode, which I think is where it seems like there's a lot of action there now, as opposed to catering to the people who might want to actively control, as I might, and choose all the segments. I think they're trying to capitalize on their very large platform that they have, and trying to create something more like a radio experience, where you turn on the app and it just plays through radio stories and you can kind of skip ahead. It's more like a kind of Pandora for radio, though obviously it's all just NPR. And actually,
so if you like a certain subject, it will kind of play things within that subject.
I think so, yeah. And I think there's also, if I remember correctly, every few stories, I think a donate button comes up. So I think that there is, harkening back to the fundraising conversation, I think they are thinking about that too.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, everyone. It's a really interesting discussion, and we'll be checking out the new CEO and his moves, and if he fulfills his promise of staying for 5 years or not. I want to thank our panel. We have Andrew Lee from American University, Fannie Cohen, our producer in New York, Joseph Lichterman at Neiman Journalism Lab, Stan Alcorn, freelance journalist and contributor to NPR and Fast Company, and Suzanne Perry from the Chronicle of Philanthropy. You can catch us each and every week on Fridays with the MediaTwits at MediaShift at MediaShift.org. We'll catch you next week. Take care, everyone.